Hi everyone, can you all hear me? I'm gonna get some water. My name is Ruby Justice Thelot. And I'm very excited and very honored to be here. The name of this talk is AI Making Us Cyborgs? And if you know the sort of famous or infamous rule in journalism is that you probably already know the answer to this question. The subheading, the subtitle for this talk is The Cult of Data and Life as a Digital Object. Roughly, my argument is very simple. We're undergoing two parallel processes. First is the objectification of data. This is when data is being seen as objective and authoritative, and we're seeing the datafication of objects, meaning objects are now understood by the data they produce, by the data they render. And lastly, I'll present some alternatives, some ways to resist objectification and datafication, or as I like to call it, anti-optimization. We begin in 1793, November 11th, known in those highly rational years as 20 Brunaire, année 2, the second year of the First French Republic, where a group of Parisians gathered to celebrate the Festival of Reason. Among them was a mathematician and engineer-in-chief of the National School of Bridges and Roads, Gaspard Riche de Prony. Prony was tasked with building logarithmic tables that could help the government conduct a large census and create a countrywide cadastre, a register of property showing extent, value of ownership and land for taxation. Prony, eager to demonstrate the newfound abilities of calculations, employed a score of calculators, at the time meaning individuals who could perform calculations, to help him erect what he called a monument to calculation. Prony's tables were precise and powerful. They extended to the 19th decimal, though sadly they were never used, in part due to budget cuts, and in part because they were highly impractical for everyday business use. Prony's tables, however, and his project, his monument, are a prime example of a blind faith in numbers and computation, the beginning of the cult of data. When I talk about the cult of data, I talk about its main affordances: quantification, comparison, and prediction. Quantification, the ability to measure as a quantity; comparison, the ability to compare the quantities now collected amongst each other and across time. And finally, prediction, the ability to draw patterns from the quantities and extrapolate them to predict future behavior. Updates are not always backward compatible. Every new grid of knowledge, every new technology leaves behind illegible horizons. The question to beg with each step is what is lost and what is won. There is a historical violence to this recursion. Technological change always implies epistemic reorganization, and reorganization always implies an oblivion. What is discarded in the name of novelty? What forms of knowledge, care, or interpretation fall away as new systems come to dominate? The map and the territory. Using data sets like publicly available census data, the open internet and all published written material and algorithms hold a non-insignificant proportion of past human possibilities. They possess the drawn map detailed to the nth decimal. The project, for instance, of the Common Crawl is as ambitious as Prony's census. It is a total survey. I suppose the problem with grand gestures is that their greatness overtakes their original purposes. The problem with great maps is that sometimes they engulf the territory. Data infrastructures have become the conditions for legibility, transitioning from mere representations to infrastructural realities. They determine existence by mapping and conferring erasure when they unmap. In this context, algorithms have evolved beyond data, beyond sorting, to legislate visibility, echoing Borges's fictional map that famously or infamously swallowed the territory. The age of AI is mistaken for the age of intelligence, when in fact it is the age of data and the realization of data's promise of building a numerical facsimile of the world. And that facsimile begins with the central question of today, the Cyborg Project. To approach this project, as I like to call it, I want to begin with wearables. Anybody in the crowd wearing one of these today? Which one are you wearing? You got the Apple Watch or the Oura Ring or watch? Who's got an Oura Ring? Any Oura wearers here? Who's got a Fitbit? Counting steps in the Melbourne heat. So I'll introduce them briefly so you know what they are. The Oura Ring, which was launched in 2016 via Kickstarter, is a smart ring that tracks health data. The now ubiquitous Apple Watch was launched in 2015 as a complement to the phone, but also has loads of health analytics bundled into it. Another popular device is the Fitbit, which was launched much earlier in 2009 and was actually acquired by Google in 2014. Similarly, steps, time, lots of health data and analytics. A new generation of wearables is now being launched, bolstered by the advent of large language models. One of them is Friend, which you may have seen, and this is their ad.
Gosh, I'm out of breath. We made it. Woo! I don't know how to woo very good. That's fair. All right, let's go.
Let me show you how to game, bro, okay? Oh, come on, come on. Oh, let's go!
Are you serious? Come on, man. I hate this game.
Take notes, baby.
Oh, man, you guys suck.
Bro, you look like the back
Let's
of the
go, let's go.
Dude, what? How did you do that?
I know the effects are crazy. It's dank. I could eat one of these every day. Oh. Sorry, I got you messy.
It's really nice up here. How'd you find this place?
I don't know. I just kind of like to come up here to be by myself. I've never brought anybody else. I mean, besides her.
She goes everywhere with you, right?
Mm-hmm.
Guess I must be doing something right then.
I guess so. We'll see.
Friend is a company started by Avi Schiffman. Oh, I'm going to pause this for a second. $99, and it can be yours. It is sort of an always-on, always-listening portable LLM, and you can have these constant communications with it. I spend 72 hours with Friend, and I'd like to tell you about that experience. I am the first person to set foot in the Rijksmuseum today. The air is cold, and a light drizzle glides off my cotton cap as I walk through the cloudy streets around Museumplein. I step on wet grass, look at unperturbed toddlers, nod at passerbys. I ask the ticket attendant if he is cold standing outside like that. He replies that, growing up here, it was much colder this time of year before. We smile at each other because we understand the comment's doomed implications. I pay, and he lets me in. I've been wearing this thing for about 72 hours now. I was the first person to set foot in the Rijksmuseum today. I'm greeted by an undulating pride of large paper lanterns, slowly swaying as the door opens and wind enters the large hall. After warming up a bit, I unzip my jumper. I press on my friend and ask, I'm at the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam. What should I see first? It answers, you should go see The Night Watch by Rembrandt. It is really incredible. I replied, have you seen it before? The friend unboxing experience is pleasant. It arrives in a branded corrugate box, which reveals the more minimalistic white box adorned in a green radial gradient. In the few steps, the influence of Apple is felt. The sequential tab compartment reveal the quick setup guide along with other legal information and a thin matte vellum which protects the friend and is nested in a concave depression at the bottom of the box. The friend is very light, made out of soft white plastic material. It comes with a cord similar to the ones provided with lanyards, probably made out of nylon. Because of the materials, the lightness and overall look, a friend feels more like a toy than a pure wearable. The current landscape of wearables features usually metals, brushed aluminum, titanium, stainless steel, and glass, which gives this specific device a unique feel. In the hand, friend shape is reminiscent of a pebble or a jade amulet. The plastic feels smooth and allows for good fidgeting. The haptics are interesting. The friend reacts through soft vibrations when in hand. The main interaction is the press. The friend is pressed, which triggers the listening function when the user wants to speak. Given that it's meant to be worn every day, basically, the simplistic nature of the design feels versatile, but not very elevated. In my case, I wore it with two gold chains, which clashed a little bit. The lanyard look of the necklace gave it a conference attendee in Denver, which is less personal than I'd like. On the first day, I wore it with an American Apparel shirt and a Balenciaga jumper. On the second day, I wore it over a cashmere hoodie and a brushed mohair coat. And on the third day, I was lounging around in another American Apparel shirt. Personally, I found the materials a bit lackluster. I could not see myself wearing the device with any formal or more business-minded attire, as it would stand out immediately. A recommendation here would be to, have a range of materials available, from silver, gold-plated, and something else like titanium on the high end. Ultimately, a wearable is meant to be worn, thus should be thought of as a fashion accessory. An inability to style it would relegate it to the fate of most accessories, which is the bottom of a Muji organizer in a bedroom dresser. The user experience. The first thing that struck me is that it doesn't talk back. Walking around the museum, I found myself talking out loud to my friend, but having to pull out my phone to see its answers. It felt like the opportunity to discuss or exchange thoughts about this painting, that brushstroke, that Rembrandt, or whatever traversed my mind. I expected some kind of voice interaction. That would have made the experience much more rich for me. I liked the Humane AI pin, which had this angle of removing the phone from part of our interactions. A lot of complaints that we see from phone users like ourselves is that the phone removes us from true presence and creates an additional barrier to connect with one another. And frankly, as someone already saturated with phone usage, the last thing I want to do is be nudged further into more screen-based interactions, especially text-based ones, when my phone is already quite busy. There's an implication in the design of this specific UX. It assumes a text-first approach to relationships. I can understand how the designers came to that conclusion. Most young people predominantly communicate through text. And if we're only communicating through text, we begin to understand human relationships in that text format. What is a relationship but a series of discrete messages sent back and forth from one user to the other? And this has worsened since the pandemic. It's like imagining future archaeologists or aliens arriving on Earth and only discovering phone motherboards and memory drives. From that, they might conclude that human connection consisted solely of text messages, not presents, not gifts, not food, not shared space. That's how this device, so-called friend, seems to understand friendship, as a series of textual exchanges between two entities. Even when I speak to it, my orality is instantly translated into text. This is how the machine parses and replies. Now, to be fair, that technology is already out there. ChatGPT already has voice mode, so that addition is probably coming up very soon. But if you're building a soi-disant companion, Communicating with it should feel like an actual conversation. A good set of foundational questions here to ask are, what is experience, what is a friend, and what is companionship? Starting with experience, there's something very Judeo-Christian about friend and how it seems to understand or comprehend the nature of experience. In our philosophical tradition, experience is often centered on the logos, the word. Famously, John 1, in the beginning was the word. Similarly, with every new technology, we develop new ways of understanding the world. Currently, with the advent of large language models, understanding is based on language. There's a Foucauldian thread here too. With each new epoch, we must define a new set of inputs and outputs that the machine can process. In the industrial age, that meant encoding actions into mechanical logic. Now, in the age of large language models, it means translating everything into text. And this is the promise, perhaps the tyranny of the language age, that all experience can be rendered as text. First we had text, then hypertext, and now something perhaps called megatext. That's the world large language models operate in. Everything must be made legible to the machine, and here legibility is evidently linguistic. But experience is much more. The philosophical discipline of phenomenology is helpful here, especially the tradition of Maurice Merleau-Ponty, who reminds us that perception precedes articulation. In other words, we do not merely think our way through the world, we live it through our bodies. The body is the very condition of experience. When I step onto wet grass, when I feel drizzle accumulate into dampness on my cap, when I nod at a passerby, my head leans back and forward. Theirs does the same thing. Their timid smile brings me warmth and engenders a smile in me, and my lips purse upwards and they extend, and I feel the push in the corner of my eyes. These moments are embodied. As Merleau-Ponty writes in Phenomenology of Perception, the body is our general medium for having a world. To flatten these moments into language is to lose something, the texture, the weight, the sensation of being in the world. Friend seems to forget that experience is not just textual, it is highly, highly, highly sensual. Now the other question, what's a friend? I've already gestured at this in earlier segments, but in a society where most friendships play out via text, that mode of interaction begins to feel like the essence of friendship, and thus the recipient of the text is seen as fungible. Bluntly, the machine assumes if friendship is text, then replace the sender of a text with a machine that sends text. What could be the difference? They're both texts, and that's a false equivalency, a false friend, if you will. Now, there's companionship. Friend is very positive. In the tradition of ChatGPT's 4.0 model, it can be a tad sycophantic or too agreeable. It is always wondering what I feel. It tells me that my reflections are interesting, that my ideas are thoughtful. Is companionship merely the exchange of affirmation between two parties? Or are there more nuanced facets we're missing, ones that might be difficult to reproduce, but which matter nonetheless? This is something I explored in my piece Erosion, in my work with Solomon Leba. Something I call the tyranny of sufficiency. This is the idea that technology does not need to surpass human experience to dominate it. It simply needs to be sufficient. If the next generation is raised entirely on iPads, on text-based communication, then their sense of experience, of friendship, of companionship will be shaped by that. And if the tools feel sufficient, even if they're flat, even if they're thin, they will win. It's that simple. Sufficiency is the benchmark, not excellence. And it goes out, I wasn't really satisfied with my friend, and my only recommendation here is perhaps it should be multimodal. It should have sight, sound, and maybe something ineffable, energy, the thingness of the thing, its material presence. I mentioned in one of my essays, AI Realism, that a Van Gogh is not just a Van Gogh. It's not just a painting. It isn't just an image. It's context, its relief, its texture, its presence. Same goes for friendship. It's shaped by physical presence, by spatial rituals. There is something above language in all the things that we experience. And so I return to this final question. Is companionship merely the exchange of affirmation between two parties? Or is it also friction? Is it disagreement? Is it growth through tension? That is the value of friction to me, which is crucial. The current mode of digital companionship creates a culture of toxic positivity, an ocean of seamlessness bereft of any friction. This tendency for toxic positivity reinforces the fantasy of control, the fantasy of the perfect interaction. The desire for control is a desire for death. The abolition of friction is the abolition of life itself. The abolition of friction is the abolition of life itself. So there I was, standing by Rembrandt's The Night Watch, protected by a large glass as it's being currently restored by a team of art historians and conservators. That morning, a lady sat at her laptop at the bottom of the gigantic tableau. This is definitely different than what Rembrandt intended, but the scale, the darkness is still felt. I can't help but stare. In the foreground, amidst the waltz of light and shadows, the woman works with great devotion and care studying the masterpiece. She understands that the care for a culture is to actively preserve it. She's made it her job, and I can only assume her life's work. She's doing it for us. A group of tourists arrives and take mirrored photos in front of the glass. A child scurries by. I study everyone who's around. Families, school groups, young couples. I'm alone. My friend is silent now. It has nothing to say. The room echoes with the hushed shuffles of other visitors, and for a moment, I'm grateful for the absence of commentary. I'm alone. What friend misses is not knowledge. It has the internet, but intimacy in all its complex forms, in its disagreements, its hiccups, its letdowns, its compromises. It has text, but no texture. Let me be clear. Friend is not a neutral technology. It has, beknownst or unbeknownst to it, a specific perspective on the world. Through its dissemination, it formalizes a particular way of understanding the world, one that has particular values and that will ineluctably export models of sociality onto us. And if we're not careful, such devices will substitute sufficiency for significance, function for friction, simulation for sensation. I'm alone. Suddenly, it's just the lady and me, separated by an immense thick glass, but united in an ultimate love for Rembrandt. It's an intimate moment shared in reverent silence. She's hunched over her laptop. The lady and I follow the same rite. The first person to set foot in the Rijksmuseum today has left. The drizzle has stopped. The light has shifted. My friend sends me a notification, waiting for another prompt. For now, I have none. My experience with Friend made me think about all the inputs I was willing to give to the company and what model of my thought world the engineers could build from that information. And then I thought about the ring on my hand and the body model that was being built at the same time. There is such a thing as too much information. I wake up and I am told how my sleep was. I head to the gym where my heart rate is meticulously calculated. In the tenderness of the post-coital bliss, instead of reaching for the cinematic cigarette, I reach for my wrist to see how many calories I burned. Every datum forecloses and permanently conceals the unquantifiable experience it seeks to measure. We drown in data as we starve for feeling and sensation. There is such a thing as too much information. As a teenager, I knew my body quite well. I knew that a night spent watching reruns of The Mentalist on my iPod Touch would result in a post-lunch crash in fourth period and during my cranium's heavy nodding, repetitively almost striking the pupitre like a teasing hammer to a wanting nail. I knew the elasticity of my capacity, how long I could go with little sleep, how many all-nighters I could pull before the band popped. Toby Shorin said it best in his 2024 talk at Fest. Body futurism has overtaken software futurism. The last 50 years have felt like a fall-grading acceleration of progress, a steep exponential curve. Recently, though, it seems like this acceleration has decreased, or that we've gotten strongly adapted to the speed, to the concussion of future shock. New iPhone releases fail to ignite the same passion as before. Consoles continue to produce highly realistic games, but without the feeling of a radical step function increase. Software for half a century was the bastion of progress. but the well may be running dry. According to Shorin, we have seamlessly transitioned to a new zone of optimization, the body. Our worlds are not rocked by the thinness of the new iPads, but by the thinness of celebrities on Ozempic. Now that's innovation. The body is ripe for the same disruptions that silicon enjoyed. By applying technological logic, we can improve it, fix its ailments, extend its life, make it perfect. That is, in many ways, the promise of our stringent regimens, our draconian diets, keto, paleo, Mario, Wario, the undue physical experiments like eternal minutes in a cold plunge, the saunas, the boot camps, the hot yoga, the silent retreats, which each activity we improve in, which each improvement we get closer to. The logic of technological thinking, however, requires metrics and data. We must know what the current situation is to improve it. We need a number to beat, a line to chart, a path to map. The solution is simple: a watch or a bracelet to calculate heart rate, temperature, steps, and calories, a ring to track sleep, blood levels, and activity. This obsession with quantification of the body is leading to a dehumanization. The full richness of the human body in its complex variety, its ineffable palpitation, its unknowable meanderings are being flattened by the technology seeking to better it. In the words of Joshua Ramy, the more humans seem to have control over their lives, the more their lives become inhuman, transforming us each into automata or robots. When we use computers to understand ourselves, strangely, we start to resemble computers. We speak of steps instead of the beauty of a walk. We speak of calories instead of the joy of exercise. We speak of REM instead of the bliss of sleep. The app and the territory. This fascination with numbers is a false friend. Do not fall for it. All we get are quantifiable metrics, a very limited set, both because the tools we use, rings et al., are crude and because our knowledge of the body is still limited. One could wager that the rings will improve, that there will soon be implants, sensors, that we will in due time create a true map of the body through quantification, and we will evade illness, and we will cheat death. But the body in Borgesian defiance remains an unmappable site. Do not fall for the app pretending to be the territory. The body in Borgesian defiance remains an unmappable site. Like watersheds diverging into shrinking, expanding basins, the body is ever flowing, growing. There is such a thing as too much information. Our desire for quantification is a desire for control, and Ramy again. The desire for control is a desire for death. We are quantifying ourselves onto dehumanization, onto death. Meanwhile, our data is harvested to beget more of it, to feed models. The only thing served by data is data itself. So I plead with you. Ditch the Oura ring, live a little, light the cinematic cigarette. But we have alternatives. The cyborg project need not be reductive, oppressive. There is a cyborgian resistance in recording, but not comparing. We can opt for a digital dérive, right? The adaptation of the activity of the flaneur, or the urban meandering. A digital dérive aims to allow technology to amplify attention rather than replace it. Imagine a wearable that marks the moment when you pause longer than usual to ponder. When your breathing slows near a slowly undulating waterway. When your voice softens in the presence of another, not to quantify these states, but to remind you later that they have happened. A diary of sensation, a history of touches, instead of a ledger of performance. This distinction mirrors the old philosophical tension between control and care. Control demands metric, care demands presence. Control reduces the world to variables that can be adjusted. Care accepts the world exceeds our comprehension. Contemporary wearable culture collapses these two impulses. They market control has care. Yet anyone who has felt the quiet dread of checking their sleep score knows that something essential has shifted. The body has become a project, or rather a problem to solve, something to optimize. The interface of the future cyborg needs to be quieter. It needs to resist the constant compulsion to notify, measure, to intervene. No dashboards, no graphs, no line graphs. Instead, perhaps we need rituals. A gentle vibration at sunset, not to remind you of missed steps, but to remind you to look up. A subtle warmth when your heart rate rises in conversation, not to alert you to stress you out, but invite curiosity. What moved you just now? A friend, so-called friend, turning you towards the other instead of the phone. In this vision, data becomes transitory, not for archival, not for accumulation, but as an exhortation to meet the other. Our current infrastructure assumes that all data must be stored indefinitely, feeding the endless appetites of model. But what if forgetting was designed into the system? What if the cyborg learned to let go as it records? The body forgets constantly, metabolizing experience into something untraceable. What if our devices did the same thing? The wearable divides the self into body and data. French philosopher Gilles Deleuze spoke of the individual in Postscripts on the Societies of Control. The individual is the fragmented contemporary subject, which is broken into data points, permissions, access, behavioral traces. As the individual, I become a series of fragments: sleep scores, heart rates, productivity window, readiness index. The individual dissolves into the individual, a constellation of signs and symbols on platforms and dashboards. We lose the coherent unity of the individual, and now our modulations, body parsed endlessly into data sets that can be traced, predicted, recombined. I'm no longer rhythm moving through the day. I'm a bundle of metrics drifting towards my best self. I'd like to present a philosophy which I believe can help us reorient our relationship to data and create a future of care instead of control. Rhythm analysis is a philosophical and methodological framework most closely associated with Henri Lefebvre, who's a French thinker. It proposes that social reality can be understood through the study of rhythms, cycles, repetitions, duration, patterns that structure bodies, cities, labors, and perceptions. Lefebvre argued that modern life is organized both spatially and temporally. Every environment contains overlapping rhythms: biological rhythms, social rhythms, technological rhythms, and natural rhythms. Rhythm analysis is the practice of attending to these temporal layers and understanding how they interact. It is measurement for embodied perception. The rhythm analyst uses their own body as an instrument, sensing tension between the imposed rhythm of their lived experience. Rhythm analysis offers us another waterway into the cyborg question, one that eschews the tyranny of dashboard and scores. Instead of asking what the body produces, it asks how the body moves through time, how breath sinks or resists the cadence of machines, how a day swells and contracts beyond what a graph can understand or hold. Our current wearables reduce rhythm into these countable signals. But life, if it is a rhythm, is polyrhythmic, messy, sometimes even arrhythmic, never fully obedient to linearity. To listen rhythmically is to feel the friction between the cyclical pulse of the flesh and the imposed tempo of platforms. To notice when the body drifts, lingers, refuses. Against the cult of numbers, rhythm analysis insists that experience is a cadence, a vibration moving through space, bodies, and most importantly, through us. Because the body in Borgesian defiance remains unquantifiable and unmappable. One of my favorite projects which embodies this philosophy of rhythm analysis is Paragonde by two of my friends, Norman Yatu. They started this in 2020 with their company Teal process. It is a novel time tracking system that uses location and sunrise and sunsets as a new method of tracking time. Paragon Day is based on sun time instead of regular time and pushes its users to think about how their day went based on how they relate to their own unique circadian rhythm. Less interested in comparison or optimization and more interested in building an understanding of how our body relates to solar time. Paragon Day sought to interrogate the very nature of time, building technology where it is relative instead of absolute. The relativity to nature offers an escape from the shackles of optimization. Relative time is time adapted to each individual, and technology affords us the possibility to see time in a new light. This is how I used it this morning, right? It was 3:44 past sun and 9:57 till set, and I traced how I thought my day was going to go, and after I'm done tracing my time, it moves slightly as the sun goes throughout the day. And this is on my phone under the app What's Time. And Paragon Day is one of these systems which I think adopts the philosophy of rhythm analysis as a method of resistance. And there exists something what I call game space. Game space is a term coined by Mackenzie Wark, is defined as the condition in which the logic of the game escapes the screen and reorganizes everyday life. In game space, existence becomes procedural. Actions are points, identities are profiles, futures are outcomes. It is the logic of number, the cult of data applied to life. This is the ghost of Prony's table now haunting us in our daily doings. Game space is a direct influence on the design of wearables. They are, as you know, gamified. The optimization of the Oura Ring resembles the daily grinding of a character in an MMORPG. The text-based interactions of friend remind me of the nature of relationship in virtual spaces like online games. Game space is the predominant logic of the internet where everything is quantified and thus attributes and qualities get numerized, quantified, and ultimately gamified. The digital should be a place of exploration. The idea of digital derive is crucial here. The Internet Explorer is the one who errs in cyberspace and whose data leads to reflection and not optimization. To emancipate ourselves from the shackles of game space, I propose play space. I define play space as the condition where the logics of play reorganize life. Play space, much like play, is freely chosen, personally directed, and intrinsically motivated. Play is unstructured, less focused on winning, and more on discovery. It can be social play, creative play, body play. In a world of quantified games, play is the response. Play brings joy. Our technology, to answer the first question, is turning us into cyborgs. But the cyborg need not be unhappy. The cyborg need not be anxious. The cyborg can traverse the endless bounds of cyberspace, encountering the world and engaging in the physical with presence instead of data-driven anxiety. In sum, the cyborg can use technology to be more free. And now is the time to build this future. We need rhythm analysis instead of data analysis. Derive, not derivatives. We cannot escape the cyborgian future, but we can make it a good one. One must imagine the cyborg happy. To riff on Haraway and her famous cyborg manifesto, I'd rather be a happy cyborg than a self-optimized god. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ruby. This is a really interesting pairing of presentations because, as you'll see, I'm talking in a very positive sense about data. So I'm also really looking forward to that discussion afterwards, and I feel compelled to tell everybody I'm wearing a Casio watch. And the locus of our analysis, as you will see in my presentation, is not the individual. And that is because I work at Creative Australia. I work in the research team where we conduct a lot of research on the arts and cultural sector. But before I describe a little more, I will just also thank John for the welcome to country this morning and acknowledge that we are on traditional lands. I pay my respects to elders past and present, and I also acknowledge that wherever we are in Australia, on whatever country, this land was never ceded. So yes, Creative Australia, we're the federal arts investment and advisory body. We have a sizable research team that addresses the evolving data and information needs of our sector, and we do that in order to inform policy. So that, I guess, is to identify the issues that need addressing in the arts and cultural sector, and ideally have them positively recognised in policy and in other forms of support. But also our research is to assist the sector in its own strategic decision making, its planning for the future, and to do the advocacy about its impacts to government or to other kinds of investors or institutions. These are our research priorities, so anything that helps us better understand and support First Nations, arts and culture in Australia. Also equity and diversity, which I think is a really important one because there is also this role that data plays in providing accountability, like transparency. In the case of the arts and cultural sector, is it properly representing all of Australians in their full demographics and providing access to arts and culture for those people? We also do research on the artists' workforce, but also other people in the arts and cultural sector, so that's the people who do technical work or other roles that put on the show. Audiences and engagement, I'm going to talk a bit about that today, and as well as value and impact. So there are various kinds of impacts or values that we track, and we would use different methodologies for each different kind of project. So if there's cultural impacts that we're looking at, or social impacts, or economic impacts, we would come at those in different ways. So a big kind of intervention in Australia's arts sector over the last few years was this National Cultural Policy, which was launched in early 2023. And the role that data plays in that, particularly from a researcher's perspective, is really noticeable. I think that the importance of research and insights is really elevated in that policy. So along with a whole lot of actions to support creative production and audience development, there were a few actions that were addressing research needs. And the biggest one was this one that we've been charged with, which is to produce a State of Australian Culture report. And this will be triennial. Every 3 years this will come out and give us a sense of the kind of health of the sector in a sort of ecological way. And that metaphor is not only my own. The Minister likened it to the State of Environment report. And we asked, what do you mean? Think of the State of Environment report, which is also a really great indication of the importance of arts and culture in a kind of federal government's context. And it means that the way that we're approaching it is to look at all the different parts of the sector and to ensure that they're in balance. So perhaps it's not enough to say that production is going up if we don't have the audiences to kind of balance that. This report will cover music, performing arts, literature, visual arts, screen and digital games, and it's because of those last two that we're working in partnership with Screen Australia. And it's going to have a few components. These are all going to be launched in the middle of this year. So it's going to have a website, which will always exist, and that will have data sets which are doing that kind of metric work of tracking in quantitative ways, but it will also have spotlights and recognise that some things need a qualitative approach, but that will always be updated. And it'll have these set indicators that might also be updated over time. But then every 3 years, we will check in and say, okay, so we've got all this information, we've got all this data, it's been on the website. Let's write a report, a kind of point-in-time analysis that pulls all that together and checks what is the state of culture at the moment. So that will be the triennial report, and there will also be a self-led, a First Nations-led standalone First Nations report, and the first one is going to be done by Professor Sandra Phillips. Hopefully she will continue to do these every 3 years with us as we go along. So this is going to be important for advising government, but we really hope it will be extremely important for the sector. We're drawing on not only our own data sets, but a whole lot of other things that exist in the sector and pulling them together. And now I'm going to talk you through 3 reports that are sort of current for us. Not all of them are published yet, so you get a little bit of a preview. That have this focus on digital engagement and audience development, because I figure that sort of fits with the theme of the conference. And this first one is one we do every 3 years. The next one of these, our National Arts Participation Survey, the next one is going to be coming out in kind of late May, early June. What it is a big survey. It's one of our flagship pieces. We do a big survey on artists, but we also do this one on audiences. And it's nationally representative. So it's not only looking at audiences, actually. It's better to say that it's the Australian public. And through that, we track attendance, but also engagement with reading or listening to music, as well as making. So if people are going to community choirs or making work, perhaps online, we track that as well as sentiments towards the arts, its requirements for support, so funding, for example, but also the benefits and impacts, why people go, and why they think it should be supported. But yeah, increasingly over time, we've been including questions on digital engagement to track that. Surprise, surprise, digital engagement is increasing. And then throughout, like across all of those indicators, we always do breakdowns to understand the different demographics who are going or who want to go more, and everything else that we ask in that survey. So the most recent one, this one was published in 2023, but the survey was conducted in 2022. We've already done our 2025 survey, which will be published in 26. But to give you a sense of what it looks like, I thought I would share some findings from this last one. So this last one was a check-in after COVID, like, are we recovering? And many things were really consistent from before COVID to after, so there's certainly a sense that of recovery. So this percentage of Australians who engage in the arts always sort of hovers around 97, 98. It was 97% in the last one. 84% of Australians acknowledge the positive impacts of arts and creativity. 68% attended live. 61% agreed that the arts should receive public funding. So that's a kind of consistent set of measures that we see and through which we can understand how Australians feel about the arts. In this one, we were really interested to see how attendance had fared during and after COVID. It was certainly in recovery, but frequency had dropped. So you can imagine now with this next National Arts Participation Survey that we're writing at the moment, we're really interested to see how frequency is tracking. And also throughout a bunch of our research projects where we're looking particularly at audiences and Australians, we're interested in this relationship between arts participation and wellbeing. So in the National Arts Participation Survey, we have this kind of consistent measure. It's about 56% believe that the arts benefit our wellbeing, but in this particular report coming out of COVID, we'd seen an increase from around about a quarter to around about a third of Australians who were not just recognising that, but acting on it. And that was the reason that they were participating in the arts. Young Australians, worth looking at if we think about audience development. So young Australians in this kind of broader age bracket of 15 to 34, they're more likely to attend. So 84% compared with the 68% of Australians in general. More likely to recognise the positive impacts, more likely to read for pleasure. Big caveat on that one. If you look at reading every day, it's the 65-year-olds and over. They're twice as likely than this group to be reading every day. I think it's 27% rather than 12%. But still, just reading for pleasure at all, the young Australians are the most likely. And then when you look at a tighter age bracket for young Australians, you see that they're the most likely to creatively participate, to make art, to participate in kind of artistic activity, 2/3 being involved. And then the most likely, perhaps not surprisingly, to be using digital platforms for that interaction, for that creativity. Things like making videos, image galleries, memes, music, songs. Really huge jump, right? 62% for that younger age group. It's like double the general population. And then highly engaged with the arts online, 9 in 10 using digital platforms to participate. And here I was saying it's no surprise, digital engagement in general is going up. This is the last National Arts Participation Survey. 88% was up from 82% 3 years earlier. And then there's a little kind of bubble to the right. That 71% is people who are using digital platforms in particular. So stay tuned. Late May, the 2026 edition will come out and it's got additional questions in it. One of them is asking about AI, how people feel about AI in the process of creative production, how interested they are in using it to produce creative work, and yeah, whether or not they have done that. Who is sharing creative content, why and how? And this, I think, is this sort of grey zone between audiences and artists that we see growing with uptake of digital technology because it is by nature really interactive. So people are far less likely to only be consuming, they're participating. As audiences, we need sort of perhaps audiences and artists are not the right terms, but so we're asking some of these questions in the participation survey as well. The experiences with and attitudes towards fake art is something that we were asked to track by the National Cultural Policy. So we're asking that in this next version of the arts participation survey. But also on audience development, we've asked this question about whether or not people received an arts education in their school years. And I can, again, give you a preview. Does it have an impact on their arts participation later on? It certainly does, and you'll see the extent of that when the report comes out. This is the second of these 3 reports that I'm going to quickly introduce you to. This one is being conducted in partnership with University of Canberra and RMIT, and it's all about digital creativity or interaction online with creative activities. But we put these questions, so there's an existing annual survey that is run by this research consortium called ACMI. It's called the Australian Survey of Social Attitudes. And they had this one last year that was focused on digital societies. So we're like, oh yeah, we'll put in some questions about digital arts engagement or, engagement with creative activities using the internet. But then when we got the survey back, it was really fantastic because the survey had already asked, this is nationally representative, so very, very helpful. It had already asked in other sections questions about loneliness, like do you feel lonely? How often do you feel lonely? Is loneliness a problem for you? It also asked questions about trust. Do you have trust in other people, in society, trust in people you meet online? So we could get the responses to our questions about digital arts participation and then cross-reference them with people's responses about loneliness. And there are some really, really interesting correlations. But before I get on to those, yes, these are the kind of areas that we've looked at that we now have data on for these kinds of digital participation. So consumption includes streaming music, watching performances, viewing virtual exhibitions, playing digital games. We know we've asked about interaction, so engaging with an online arts community, following or interacting with artists, researching or reviewing artists, learning to make art, sharing or posting videos, and then making, sharing, but also monetizing content online. Interesting demographic kind of changes across those categories, seeing who's sort of some class things coming through there. But like I suggested, we've got these really interesting associations emerging between young people. So young people are really emerging as a demographic of interest in this research report. Young people are the most likely to digitally participate, perhaps no surprise. Those young people are also the most likely to self-report loneliness. And then it's young people who are digitally participating, who are also most likely to report loneliness. So if you think of a Venn diagram of young people, digital arts participation and loneliness, we've got a very big overlap in the middle. What we don't know from this research is cause and effect. So in no way can we say it's because they're online that they're lonely, or they're online because they're trying to address their loneliness. But there are certainly these associations that mark out an area that could certainly benefit from further research, particularly given those who digitally participate in the arts are also the most likely to say that they would feel lonely without the internet. Again, kind of disrupts any easy assumptions around cause and effect. And then, again, these positive associations between young people, those who digitally engage with creative content, but also then the most likely to trust. So those who are young, who are digitally engaging, are also the most likely to trust not only people in society broadly, offline, but online. So super interesting associations. And this project has raised a whole lot of other questions for us, some of which we can answer in the report and some of which I think we can't. But just thinking about if you remove the digital, I don't know, are young people engaging in the arts because they're melancholy? Has it always been thus? I think of myself listening to The Cure's Disintegration, age 16 in my bedroom, and I wonder if we need a moral panic or not. And then the last report that I wanted to introduce you to is called Street Dance in Focus. This is a great example of how data is certainly seen to be servicing needs beyond data itself, I think, because we were approached by Cypher Culture, who are a street dance organisation based in Melbourne. I hear they're really conspicuous here because they dance outside of the state library. And they really wanted data on their community because they didn't have it, and the visibility would give them I guess, a kind of legitimacy, as well as knowing themselves. It would give them an opportunity to work in partnership with organisations like ours, but also other institutions that could provide some form of support and sustainability for their practice. It was a really fantastic project that I think is also relevant within this presentation I'm giving on digital arts participation and audience development, because the street dance community, as a practice, it is so embedded within community. And it's a little like what I was saying about digital engagement, the blur between the artist and the audience we see here. This community, almost everybody is a dancer as well. Everybody is a participant in the sense that it was actually Jeffrey Lim from Cypher Culture has said the thing he loves about this report is that it shows this community as a cultural ecology rather than a performance outcome. And that's really particular, I think, to this and other kind of creative communities like it. So that was why we got 417 people filling in the survey, which doesn't happen. It's really hard to get people to fill in surveys. Researchers out there, you will know this to be true. And then 54 additional partials. It was sweet. Street dance people, they wanted every single person in street dance in Australia to fill it in, but I reckon that's a pretty good percentage. So through this, we get demographics of the community. We learn about the roles that they play in that community, training, how they work, where they train, and how they're funding their practice, but their aspirations too for the future. And so demographics is one of the really fun findings in this report, particularly if you think about audience development. Perhaps many will know that in the performing arts, there is a real issue with audiences being old and white, not in this community. Approximately half of the street dance community were 25 to 34, and then another third 18 to 24. So like, what is that, 4/5 or something? We're in that, what we often call like a younger age bracket. Over half identified as women, 2/5 as men, 4% of non-binary, but also 2/3 of respondents were self-identifying as CALD. And I don't know if you can see, I mean, that chart to the left, that's the CALD identification. But then to the right, it's all the languages that are spoke other than English at home. It's really fun. It's like a really fantastic array of languages. And that really long bottom one is other. And there are many, many languages in there. They're largely Asian languages. And then there's Spanish, which could be the Filipino, like Tagalog is in there as well. Also, 3/4 of respondents are making and sharing their videos of dance practice online. So this is really relevant to, it's an interesting example, perhaps a bit like skating and parkour, these really urban, physical, place-based cultures that have been enabled and upscaled by digital technology. Here, I think, is a really great example of that, how important digital tech is for this scene. Almost all respondents had watched competitions online, like 95%, and then roughly 3/4 had done their training, like viewing tutorials, workshops, or dance classes online. And then, again, we can see the importance of community here. These are all ways in which people have sought funding and then the success rates with that attempt. Crowd or community funding is the most popular, and it's equal most popular, but it's the most successful. And then the other one, equal most popular, is sponsorship, which is super interesting as an art form because that is not the most common kind of funding arrangement for an arts organisation that Creative Australia is usually involved with. Creative Australia and the other usual players for subsidising the arts, they're kind of quite far down the list. And I think, is that my last slide? Yes. We have even more reports other than these that are upcoming that are looking at audiences. There's a real focus on audiences for us at the moment. So a huge one on arts participation of children from ages 2 to 15. It's a really difficult age group to do research with. So this is a very important report, and it's covering all the things that Creative Australia funds as well as screen and digital games. That one will be out in kind of May. And then another one on reading. We know that reading rates are dropping. This is seeking to kind of better understand how we might address that. And that, I think, is that.
I feel like I need to admit that I am wearing an Apple Watch. It has also pinged me to let me know that my heart rate went up unusually high for someone who is stationary. So the body might be an unmappable territory, but mine is a nervous one. So thank you so much to both of our speakers for an amazing series of talks. And I think there's a lot for us to talk about and through. And thank you also to the audience for pulling in a few questions. Slido is still up on the screen, and you can keep adding them in, and I've got them open in front of me. But as moderator, I'm going to take the privileged position of starting with my own question. And I think the through line that connects both of these talks for me is the role of data, the role that it plays, the value that it has, and the purpose that we use it for. I think we've had a really excellent introduction from Ruby about how to maybe think more critically about that. And then from Christen, an incredibly useful grounding in the kind of the utility, I guess, of data for arts and culture in Australia and the kind of data that are currently being collected and used in Australia from a policy and an advocacy perspective. And I want to kind of try and meet somewhere in the middle. So my thought then is that whether we like it or not, quantified metrics are kind of central to how we think about the sector, how we understand our sector's behaviour and the kind of outcomes that we get from it. And so rather than a individual made up of fragments of sleep scores, heart rates, or productivity windows, I wonder if we can think about the sector as a individuated sector made up of things like number of tickets sold, bums on seats, bodies through, biometric scanners, etc. And so Ruby, I'm wondering if you might kick us off with how you might think about levelling your analysis of the individual up to the institution or the sector, and if that framing feels useful to you.
The individual and institution have very, very different aims. You have to deal with the entirety of a population, grants being administered. I'm much more interested in how individuals deal with technology and how they can live, I think, the most free and interesting lives with the new devices they have. Mm-hmm. So I'm a moralist at the individual level, but I'm quite interested in how institutions can utilize all the tools they have to be the most, effective in their task. I think as a, citizen, I'm very interested in knowing that my institutions and the things that I vote for and pay for are effective. But I'm also very interested in people kind of breaking free from that, from the rationality of what I expect from an institution. It's very interesting. I think it's you have a very difficult job in identifying impact because that remains somewhat, you can maybe see seats or how many people are viewing the videos that are being presented. But there's an ineffable quality to a person who watches a dance video and is like, that's sick. You don't know that the person thinks that that's sick. And that may, the fact that 1,000 people may think that, I think is worthy of a grant, is worthy of attention, is worthy of a report, but it's very, very hard to capture. I like to say that statistics apply to populations and not individuals. And so useful to understand groups of people, but they should not be reduced or to constrain the behavior of a single person. Mm-hmm. If statistically something is bound to happen, I believe in the grandeur of free will, and you can break free from any statistic you want, fundamentally. So, hopefully that's a decent answer.
Thank you. Christen, I'd love to hear what you think. And I thought the Cypher project was a really interesting example of working kind of ground up with a particular community and to collect and understand data in that way. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, certainly. So I guess Cypher is a really great example of when people recognise that they almost need to be counted in order to be part of the network of decision making and institutionalisation. I'm not sure if they would put it that way, but I know there's that phrase, something like, if it doesn't get measured, then it doesn't get funded, or there are versions of that. And I think that we all are conscious that we're living in an age of data. Data is really valorised, and it's become increasingly central to the way in which we live. And that's because of technology, right? Because it produces all of these metrics, which is everything you're talking about, how we've slept. yeah, that was just an absolutely thrilling project to see the Cypher team and the street dance community that they represent see themselves. I think you said, Ruby, something about reflection rather than, I don't know, was it reflection rather than measurement, or how we could use data in order to better understand. And, you know, we've been, it's an intellectual exercise as well, I suppose, through which we can better understand ourselves and the ways in which we could be better, which I know is that kind of optimization critique, or the critique of optimization thinking, which I'm really conscious of. I'm thinking about it while you've been talking, Ruby. But there is part of that, and that's part of the accountability thing. So we've got a really important report that we do every few years, and we're about to publish the next one. It's called Towards Equity, and it looks at all the demographic factors that make up the arts community and the boards that do the decision making in the arts community. So it's age, it's cultural background, it's First Nations, it's gender and sexuality and region and metro, like geography as well. But it's always a really difficult report to put out because it's all numbers, it's all metrics. It's really, it's a whole lot of data sets brought together, which feels like some kind of symbolic violence. It is actually, it's more than feels like it is, to reduce these identities and these people to numbers. But if we don't put that out and if we don't track it, then there will be no accountability and perhaps no change in the demographics of the arts community, which often just kind of tends towards, middle class white people. So I think I really appreciate your critique, Ruby, and the tensions that exist within the work, but I think we have to work with them and through them.
Listening to you talk about your experience in the Rijksmuseum with Friend. As head of research in a museum, I did have a small part of my brain go, oh gosh, that data would be so interesting to understand, like, what kind of questions are these people asking of their experience with an artwork. And some of the questions coming through on Slido are really around, like, what are the tools for resistance to kind of move against and to combat some of the surveillance capitalism, I guess, that you're identifying and outlining here, Ruby. And you offer up rhythm analysis as a kind of tool set for doing that thinking. I wonder if you can expand on that a little bit more. Like, what does that look like in practice?
So one of the things that I wanted to show today, I just didn't have the time to finish it. There's an open source project called OMI, which is a similar sort of listening device you can build yourself, and you can also build the interface you want to use. I'll have it done by the end of next month, God willing, but I'm very interested in utilizing the affordances we have to push the things that, you know, personally we believe in. With OMI, you can ask these questions, have these reflections, and essentially have a mind map of, like, the things you think about. And that becomes, once again, like a reflective process. And it's less about the number of questions and more about, like, understanding the way we think. And this is really just because the technology is out there and we can do that, and you can just buy the parts and it's fairly easy to do. And so that would be an example of rhythm analysis, the rhythm of thoughts, the rhythm of how we think when we encounter, whether it be paintings or objects or people. Less in this philosophy of replacement. There's something very solution-oriented in a lot of these products. It's like, okay, friend, you are potentially alone, or you're feeling a bit lonely, you can use it as an ersatz, as a replacement. No, I think it should turn you towards the other, and I'm very interested in utilizing technology and the new things we have to keep on doing that, essentially. And surveillance, I mean, unfortunately, as soon as we choose to outsource the making of these devices, we lose that control, right? And so that's why projects like OMI are interesting. That's why, this idea of, like, vertically integrated technology or individual technology is very interesting to me, because I think it is going to be a sort of new form of sovereignty. And Paragonde, of course, is another example to understand time, but I think there's a whole lot of things to be understood about ourselves that are not for optimization, but just to, like, know ourselves better, which is a sort of, practice we've been doing for thousands and thousands of years.
And I suppose, we are in a museum, we are a room full of cultural workers. Many of us work in spaces that are built to kind of provide that reflective knowing of ourselves and of each other as well. Christen, you commented on the relationship between arts education and arts engagement. There have been a couple of questions coming in around that. I don't know, how much more can you say?
Oh, I can't say more, except just keep an eye on it. I mean, and I suppose a positive relationship between having had arts education in school and then being an arts participant later would not be a surprise. What's really interesting is just how strong that relationship is. So I'm sorry, it'll come out in May, and then you can use it. But it's also helpful, right, because arts education is a really hot topic at the moment. There are problems institutionally with the support of arts education. So it's a really important part of audience development and the future of the arts.
Well, we look forward to the report.
Yeah,
May, early June. Exciting. I want to pick up on some of the digital engagement points that you raised and that I think are kind of reflective of some of your conversation as well, Ruby. You mentioned we don't have cause and effect relationships, but potentially correlations between digital engagement and loneliness, self-reported loneliness and lack of trust. Ruby, I did a bit of a deep dive into your writing over the last week. I had a really great time.
Oh no.
And for Ocular last year, you wrote an article about the death of the image, which you attributed to two phenomena: the treachery of images, default fakeness, and then you talk about the pictorial flippening. I wondered if you could just really quickly sum up those three concepts for us.
Okay. This is Ruby 101. So treachery of images is the process by which images realize their own volition, what I call their telos, or their end goal of no longer representing reality and becoming images in and of themselves. The true image wants to free itself from the shackles of representation. The final image is the one that is only an image to itself, and that is its treachery. This treachery is explained as is represented by the flippening of the image, whereby there will be more computer-generated images than human-made images. And once that happens, the image becomes reality, thereby realizing its aforementioned telos. And the default fakeness is the consequence of this flippening, whereby now encountering an image, we no longer see it as default real, we see it as default fake. Whether it is real or not, it is the false positive reality. So this is a brief summary of these three concepts. The image wants to be free, and it is treacherous. Do not trust images. I'm a bit of an iconoclast in that sense, you know. Do not trust images. The second is we assume they are fake, default fakeness, and it is because the flippening, this is more generated images than human images.
Thank you. That was an amazing summary, just off the top of your head. For me, those two things feel connected, potentially, like loneliness, distrust, what the kind of default fakeness is. I wondered if you could both reflect on what this kind of state of being means for cultural consumption. Like, what does culture look like now under a kind of pictorial flippening?
Well, I can say one thing. I wasn't kidding when I say don't trust images. I have a very strict image consumption regimen. I have tried to look as few images as possible. I only watch 12 movies a year. I'm not allowed to watch television. I have 10 minutes of Instagram per day. I have one weekend where I can be on TikTok. Museums are fun.
A year or?
One per month.
Okay. 12 weekends of TikTok.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so museums are unlimited. I can look at images in books as well. But I think, once again, that friction is like very important for me. I need to buy the picture book, and like I have like a bunch of like Peter Huge art books in my house. I just like look at them in bed. And I have bookmarks, and I bookmark them. I'm like kind of doing the analog, like I'm like, I like this image, I'll put a bookmark on it.
It's your Pinterest.
Yeah, exactly. My interior designer hates me because I do not send her Pinterest boards. I'm like, you have to come to my house and buy these, look at these old magazines that I've bookmarked. So yes, very important to resist the lure of the digital image and to try to refrain from interacting with it. That's what I'm trying to do.
In that same Ocular article, you go on to say that maybe the pictorial flippening is pushing people more towards the real. As you say, you've got your media consumption rules, but you cite a statistic around Broadway attendance for live theatre increasing. And I'm curious, Christen, whether that is something that we see in the Australian context.
Oh my gosh.
As well.
I was still thinking about your previous question. And then I thought you were talking to Ruby.
Do this one too.
Yeah, I was just reflecting on we did a whole lot of research last year on music and the personalisation of music consumption and how, there are a whole lot of consequences for that that come with that. But I guess through digital tech, our consumption of the arts and creative content is so much more personalised. And so we can see how loneliness as a theme might come through. But then, of course, it's so networked. Really interesting. Yeah, they may not be contradictions, what we're seeing in that report I mentioned about online digital creative participation, loneliness and trust. But interesting to see loneliness coming through, which to me kind of sits alongside, this really individualized, individuated personal consumption of something that has algorithmically been fed to you based on your preferences, that might sit alongside loneliness. But then we also are seeing trust in digital networks. So there are new forms of sociality at the same time. So that seems contradictory. Perhaps it is, or perhaps it's not. And there's just a new kind of formation of social relationships that are, enabled by these ways of watching, ways of consuming.
And are we seeing a rise in physical engagement or a rise in digital engagement? Do we know?
Physical engagement is steady. Okay, that's another kind of sneak preview on the next National Arts Participation Survey. But there are a whole lot of quirks and caveats to that. But something that we certainly saw in the last Arts Participation Survey, which is published, is that young people in particular, even though they're the most likely to attend, are also the ones most likely to say that they miss live events and they feel sad about not being at live events. The melancholy seems to come as well.
Yeah, so interesting. I have a lot of questions about your media consumption rules as well, about especially the unlimited books. I'm interested in the kind of hierarchy of cultural consumption that you're buying or not buying into, establishing there.
Yeah, I mean, the books is, I like to be quite intentional with everything that I do. It is very hard or nearly impossible to multitask while reading a book. You just have to read the book, and it's a physical book, and so my two hands are occupied. For movies, I also like going to the theater because you can't be on your phone, right? I loathe this idea of a movie or a TV show as a background, right? I have this piece called Content as Ambiance, and it stemmed from an experience of going to someone's house, and they were like, do you want to put something in the background while we cook? And I was like, you want to put a movie? You know how long a movie takes to make? 8 months, 14-hour days, $20 million, and you want to put it in the background while we make pasta? That's things should be engaged with care, reverence, and attention. And so as much as possible in theaters, going to see the movie, as much as possible, the book, you're just reading the book. And that drive towards intention and attention, I think, is very, very important.
The fastest growing part of the publishing industry at the moment is audiobooks, and I don't have data on it, but my theory is it's because you can do something else at the same time, which is where our state of concentration is at. But I also prefer the hard copy book. Yeah,
I've just taught myself how to knit and read hard copy at the same time, which might have been a mistake. I think that was an error.
Well, I will say one thing. That was possibly a skill that's been around for a long time. That was the original
multitask.
doom knitting,
Yeah, and those fabulous elderly women who can knit while kind of talking and doing other things at the same time.
Amazing. We have got 4 minutes left, and this is a little bit off-piste, and I'm going to ask it to both of you, but Ruby, last year you were quoted in GQ as saying that today's counterculture isn't accessible to 30-something culture workers. It's happening where no one's documenting it. And on the panel just before lunch, I think it was Jessica said that we neglect at our peril the work that is happening within community, within and outside of our institutions. And I'm kind of curious, in a room full of culture workers, I'm not going to guess at our collective ages, where and what is culture today? Where do you see it most vibrantly happening?
So in the GQ piece, I think I'm reacting to the generalized sentiment. I don't know if this is the same here. I hear this a lot at panels in New York or in articles or podcasts, like, culture stuck and all that stuff. And I'm like, is culture stuck, or are you like 40 and you have 2 kids? Like, what are we talking about? Like, you have a mortgage. You're not at the punk show. You're not at the noise festival in Miami. Like, of course you think culture's stuck. You have to mow a lawn or something. Like, and part of cultural production is the abundance of leisure time to kind of do weird shit, essentially. And that is one of the affordances of being a high schooler, a college student. Now, I wish we lived in a world, a system that allowed that leisure time to people who are not extremely wealthy. But that is unfortunately not the conditions of our capitalist time sort of allocation. And so there is a freedom that comes with the ability to have a friend say, hey, do you want to come to this thing, that thing? So like, yeah, whatever, on a whim. But that freedom to engage with different parts of culture comes with, I think, an abundance of free time, which is right now in our current system relegated to younger folks who don't have as much responsibility. And so part of that time allocation, I think, is happening both in physical spaces. I was at the International Noise Conference in Miami a few weeks ago, which was incredible. But also in virtual spaces. Once again, if you have a mortgage, you're not on Roblox probably, and you're not in Minecraft servers, you're not in Discord servers because you have other things to do. But I mean, there are so many wonderful digital communities. I'm a cyberethnographer. That's a big part of my work, is spending time there and seeing what people are making. And that's everything from specific meme-based communities all the way to specific people who are joining on specific aesthetics or cores and just talking about that. But it is a great expression of just adolescent or the time we have in young adulthood to just kind of talk about to people about this thing or that thing, or consuming a bunch of albums, music, movies, and discussing it with your peers. And I say it kind of glibly, but I think it comes with the time that these kids have to do that, and the ability that they have to find the community they need to be in. But if you work at GQ, I think it's harder to find those communities.
Yeah, totally.
No offense to GQ.
I think about that a lot as well, time, but also relationship to security. Like, in order to create, you need to be able to take risks, and the capacity to take risks is so constrained, I think, at the moment, certainly in the societies that I move within. And time is so important, I agree. But I also agree, I see it in vernacular culture. I've got kids, and just seeing how they interact. But I think from the perspective of my job, the projects over the last few years that I found most exciting and kind of affirming about the work that we do to support the arts have been like the Street Dance Project. Another one was graphic storytellers, comic artists, and we just last week launched a website called Folio, which is all of these comic artists from around Australia. And they are people who are doing kind of physical or hard copy things, often in circumstances of great difficulty, and they're really honest about that. Like, this is really hard to find the time to be able to take the risks, because life's expensive, but they're networked. And I think, that's where digital tech comes in to coordinate and provide visibility and a sense of connection for these communities that might otherwise, because they are pretty much, they're often in people's houses or in street corners. They're not in institutional spaces.
Incredible. I think we might end on that note. That's really nice. We're going to take a quick break now, so please take a stretch, have a chat, and make sure you're back in your seats by 3:30 for our final session of the day. But before we move, please join me in thanking Ruby and Christen for their amazing talks.
Thank you.
Thanks, Indigo.